Fear is the unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that one's well-being is being threatened. We have fears of all kinds. We've said the last couple of weeks that fear can be legitimate. It's like you're driving down the road and the oncoming traffic is crossing the center line. You know, there's fear there. There's imminent danger there. There's a legitimate fear. But there's also illegitimate fear. The belief that there's always something coming around the corner at us. The worry, the anxieties that kind of take over our lives. Fear can be legitimate or it can be illegitimate, but it always feels real. Fear can be helpful or it can be harmful, we've said. It can keep us from making unwise decisions that could cause harm to us or to others, or it can keep us from doing the right thing and acting in the purposes of God. We've said that fear is an emotion. Fear in itself is not a sin. As an emotion, it's neither good nor bad, but how we respond can be either good or bad. And so we need to face our fears and respond how God would have us respond. We talked about courage, how we need to do what we should do even though we are afraid to do it. Last week we talked about facing our fears with faith amidst our limitations that incite fear, trusting our limitless God. Would encourage you, if you have missed one of those lessons, go back, find that, listen to it, Facebook, on our YouTube channel, on the podcast, on our website. There's multiple places where you can find that. Catch up. Would encourage you to that. I haven't counted myself, but have been told that 365 times in the Bible we have this phrase, do not fear, or do not be afraid. We are not supposed to live in fear. The biblical authors are very clear throughout that we need to face our fears, that we don't need to be mastered by fears. There is nothing to fear except, well, there is that one place where we're told we can fear. In fact, we're not only given permission to fear, but we are instructed that we should fear. Even Jesus himself tells us there is a place to fear. Matthew chapter 10 is where we're going to be this morning. Jesus is sending his disciples out to be his ambassadors, and he's preparing them for what is about to come. He knows his disciples are going to be persecuted. He knows that some of them are even going to be tortured to the point of death. And he says to them, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Isn't that comforting? Yeah, sign me up. He goes ahead and tells them that. This new way of understanding, Jesus says to his disciples, this new way that you're going to be teaching others, it's not really going to be accepted by everybody. It's going to split up families. Some governments would even try to silence this teaching of a new king and a new kingdom, the kingdom of heaven come to earth. It's not going to be easy, Jesus says. In no uncertain terms, he says, this will be difficult. But listen to what he says to them following those words. He says, so do not be afraid of them. Isn't that great? Do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed or hidden that will not be made known. Truth, summed up, is going to win out, Jesus says. And who is the truth? Jesus is the truth, right? He's the way, the truth, and the life. So Jesus says, what I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. He's talking about boldness, right? He's talking about being courageous, facing your fears, moving forward and living into God's purposes. Then he steps it up a few notches, but repeats these words again. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body. So Jesus steps it up more than just a few notches, right? I mean, you know that guy there with the sword or machete, the assault rifle? Yeah, don't be afraid of him. He's coming after you because you follow me. Don't be afraid of him. Well, really, Jesus? Because, that seems pretty terrible, right? And Jesus says to them, you have to get the right perspective. You need to put your fears into perspective. They might kill your body, he says, but they cannot kill the soul. Be afraid. Don't be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Don't be afraid of them because they don't have ultimate power. They have limits. They can't touch your eternity. Don't be afraid of them. And then Jesus says something really interesting. He says something as if he means to encourage the disciples to face their fears with fear. He says, when you are fearing the consequences of living the righteous life I have called you to live, don't be afraid of the people who can only kill the body and can do nothing with your eternal soul. Rather, he says, be afraid. Be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Be afraid. Be very afraid, Jesus says. Be afraid of that one. Well, who's the one that Jesus is referring to here? Well, we have a hint in the NIV. They've capitalized one for us. That helps, right? But who is that one who is limitless in power? Who is the ultimate judge? Who created hell for the devil and his angels and has the authority to allow the same curse to be upon humans who also choose to rebel against God? Who is that one? The one to be afraid of is God. Does that surprise you? Interesting, isn't it? Why would God want us to fear him? And you need to understand that this is not a one-time occurrence in Scripture. It's all the way through Old Testament and New Testament. I could give you at least 100 examples of this because I actually did the count on that one, all right? We hear it again and again and again to fear the Lord. Fear the Lord. Fear the Lord. Fear the Lord. Psalm 34:11. We read these words, "Come, my children, listen to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord." When I read that, I think, how many of you parents taught your kids about the boogeyman? We don't need to teach them. Somehow they figure it out. Somehow they hear about the boogeyman. But it's not because the parents are saying, hey, kids, gather around. Have you ever heard about the boogeyman? No? Let me tell you about the boogeyman. That's creepy. That's demented, right? That's not what we do. So what is going on here where he says, the psalmist says, gather around, my children, let me teach you to fear the Lord. Perhaps this fearing the Lord is more of just a deep respect, a reverence for God. And that makes sense. And there is some evidence for this, right? Psalm 33:8, let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. But we also have verses like this. What do we do with this? Psalm 2:11, serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Does reverence cause you to tremble? It could cause you maybe to celebrate him, but with your knees knocking together? That sounds more like real fear to me than simply awe. In Jeremiah, we see the same thing. Should you not fear me, declares the Lord? Should you not tremble in my presence? Isaiah goes a bit further. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. What do you do with that? And the way that Jesus talks about being afraid of the one who has the power to eternally destroy seems to invoke fear more than just merely a reverence and a respect, to me. And then you have those times where God shows up in his manifest presence and glory. And when the Lord appeared to Isaiah, do you remember all of that? You know, in chapter 6, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, Isaiah says. And you remember how he responds? He's like, I see the Lord filling the temple. And he says, woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. He knows I'm a dead man. We see this in other places. When Moses met the Lord, he was full of fear and trembling. Hebrews 12 tells us the sight was so terrifying to Moses, he said, I'm trembling with fear. Terrifying. When God revealed himself to the Israelites in Exodus chapter 19, the whole camp trembled. All the time, when God shows up, people's knees buckle and they fall down. In the book of Revelation, John is telling about the vision he has and his response when he sees Jesus. And he says, when I saw him, when I saw Jesus in all of his glory, I fell at his feet as though, what? I'm a dead man. I think if we had just a moment in his unveiled presence, if we caught a glimpse of the Lord in all of his glory, it would knock every one of us off our feet. The scriptures say that one day, every knee is going to buckle. And every tongue is going to shout, Jesus, you are Lord. Every tongue's going to say that. Every knee is going to bow. When you really get a glimpse of God in all of his glory and his holiness and power and authority, you will also understand there is nothing else more, hear this, nothing else more fearful than God. If you can imagine those moments, Isaiah moments, that overwhelming presence, uncontained holiness of the almighty, limitless God. I dare say the fear you have about that history test this week fades pretty quickly. The fear about your job, the fear about your family, the fear about your future, about your health. There is no other fear that could touch that fear. When a fear of God fills the room, there isn't room for any other fear to be present. He squeezes every other fear out. And then you know what happens? I love this. When John saw Jesus, he fell like a dead man, but then John continues. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. That's Jesus' way. When he met the disciples, when he was walking on the water, he said, they were scared to death. He said, do not be afraid. When he met the women at the resurrection, he said, do not be afraid. When he entered the locked rooms to be with his disciples after his resurrection, he said, do not be afraid. And when Jesus instructed his disciples to fear God, to be afraid of the one who can kill the soul and body in hell. Do you remember how he followed it up? We haven't read it yet. Here's how it goes. Let's back up just a little bit, okay? Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And then he says this, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care? Where's he going with this? He knows me. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Oh, wow. He knows that much about me. So don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. That's Jesus' way. When you understand that God is for you, then who can be against you? Right? But if you don't believe that God is for you, if God isn't for you because you're going your own direction, then what can save you? Do you hear this? God wants you to learn to fear Him because the fear of God will lead you to the life that you were meant to live. Psalm 111:10 says this, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow His precepts have good understanding. In this series, we have mostly talked about how fear can be harmful. But we've also said how fear can be helpful, right? Fear of the Lord helps put all other fears into their proper place. And hear this, when all other fears are subject to God, then we are free to live without fear because the one we are to fear above all others says, do not fear. Did you catch that? That's important. When we have this proper fear of God, He trumps all other fears, right? He trumps all other fears. So any other fear that we might have, if we say, but my fear of God, that's the one fear that I can have, that I'm supposed to have, and He says, do not be afraid. Well, then I don't need to be afraid of anything. So don't bow to the fears. Let's say, well, what would others think if I begin to follow Christ? Will I lose my friend if I choose Jesus? Will I lose my job if I do what's right? Don't bow to those fears and say, what if it turns out to be more pain than pleasure for me? Will I miss out on pleasure or popularity or power if I live by kingdom values? Don't even bow to the fear that says, will I get killed for living for Jesus? Would we agree that it is clearly unwise to let our fears of the temporal life determine our course for eternity? Do we agree with that? We don't let temporal things determine our eternity. The Scriptures outline so many benefits of fearing the Lord. Let's look at a few of them. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him, what does it say? Lack nothing. Blessed are all who fear the Lord. The Lord has compassion on those who fear him. Whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death. You know, one day that the fear of the Lord will lay us bare. I like to believe that when I see Jesus, I'm going to want to run up to him, and I don't know. I don't know. What will I do? You know, that song says, will I be able to run up and grab, or will I just fall on my face and just say, holy, holy, I don't deserve to be in your presence. I don't know I don't know. I want to believe, my Jesus. I want to see you, Jesus. I want to hug you. I want to say thank you. But I don't know. One day, being in his presence is going to lay everything bare. Just like with Isaiah, everything that is unclean about us will be exposed under the light of his glory. And so we are taught, live in expectation of that day now. And when we do, we discover a life. We discover a life that is full of freedom. And hear this, and without fear. It's as though we face our fears with a fear of the Lord. I can get through anything because I just want to serve him. I do not want to disappoint him. I do not want that. As we discover the abundant life lived in fear of the Lord, that which was motivated more out of a fear of God becomes more and more motivated by a love for God. Have you noticed that? You know, the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But the goal is to love our God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, with all of our strength, to love our neighbor as ourselves. John, the Apostle John, the one who was scared to death when Jesus showed up in the Revelation, he says that we can have confidence on the day of judgment when we live to reflect Jesus in every way right here, right now. That's what he says. And while the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, a love for God is the goal. He says it this way in 1 John chapter 4. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. And then he goes on to say these words. There is no fear in love. But perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. And when we get to that place where we say, I'm not following God out of a concern about my punishment, I'm now following God out of my love for who He is, we have met the goal. That's His desire, but it begins with the recognition of who God is. And He is a being to be feared. But He wants to come to each one of us and say, but let me tell you, don't be afraid of me. Let me help you. I want to be close to you. The fear of the Lord's punishment can get you on the right track. If you are continuing in a known sin, you are rebelling against God, then you have every reason to be afraid. I'm going to invite Pastor Mark just to come to the piano and play something, because I want to offer life to you today. You remember the first mention of fear in the Bible? Very first mention of when someone said, I'm afraid. It was right after the first sin. And Adam hid himself. Where are you, Adam? Well, I hid because, what did he say? I'm afraid. See, we recognize that. We're supposed to have a fear of God. God is holy, and when we are not, there's this fear. That's a common response, to hide from God because we're afraid. But it's never a good response. Because He says, I want to come to you. I want to help you. I want to take you from this fear. And yes, you have done, and if you continue on this path, this is your, but I want you to know it doesn't have to be. And He comes to us and He says, listen, my child, I know when every sparrow falls. I know about that. I know when you fall down too. But listen, I'm here to tell you, you are worth so much more than the sparrows. I want to pick you up. And I want to love you. I want you to learn of me. Fear no fear, you learn of me and you will discover that I love you and you can love me. And what a relationship we will have.